Anyway, if you look at Yoga Sutras, once you see it, it's very systematic. It goes this, then this, then this, then this, but it's all about purifying the mind and cultivating viveka, the discernment. This is a shortcut way of saying it, of the discernment between what is not me and what is me. We take on identities of who we think we are, and we fall asleep. Yoga is a process of dealing with that coloring called klesha. So the Yoga Sutras found yoga as elucidated in the Yoga Sutras is that foundation of that pyramid. And so we can relatively easily see that the discrimination, the discernment that is first practiced in the yoga piece is carried over into the Vedanta piece, where what we're doing is contemplation. The contemplations have their main root in the Vedas and in the Upanishads and other texts, where you are doing contemplative introspection of your own nature. So, for example, a lot of the contemplations in Vedanta are based in one way or another on Om, on the Om mantra. Doesn't mean sitting around chanting Om, as nice and pleasant as that is to sit around with a group of people chanting Om and focusing the mind. Om, the four parts of Om, the Ah, U, and the silence, represent waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, and the fourth state, Turiya, which is Atman, or pure consciousness, or Brahman, or the Shakti that's one with Shiva, or the Purusha. And those three levels of the Ah, U, are also this gross plane of reality out here, the subtle, what's called sometimes the subtle psychic astral plane, and the causal plane that's underneath that, and then the absolute reality. And in the Tantra piece, in our tradition, the word that goes with this is Sri Vidya. Vidya means knowledge. Knowledge, or Vidya, is knowledge of the process called Sri. In Tantra, there are two basic principles of Shiva and Shakti. The easiest way that I know to talk about as an example of Shiva and Shakti is think of a page of a book. Imagine the page of a book, or it could be a magazine or a newspaper. And imagine that you're looking at two paragraphs on the same page of the book. Those two paragraphs have completely different meaning from one another. Why? I'll just call them first paragraph and second paragraph. The first paragraph is made of ink. The second paragraph is made of ink. Both paragraphs, when the book was printed, the ink in paragraph 1 and the ink in paragraph 2 came from exactly the same container, whatever it is, of ink, probably a liquid printing ink. The ink is exactly the same. What's the difference between the two paragraphs? The ink is formed in different shapes, what we call letters and sentences. And so we end up with two paragraphs that contain different meaning, yet they're both made of ink. So we have two things, the meaning which is different and the ink which is the same. The ink which is the same in the metaphor is Shiva. It's the pure ground out of which there can be diversity and meaning. The Shakti, the feminine, is the part that allows that ink to be shaped in different ways, and so that when you and I read that page, when we read those two paragraphs on that page of that book, we can gain the insight, the understanding, the meaning, if you will, of what came out of those two paragraphs. And so one is a manifestation of the other. And that manifesting process where ink as a metaphor comes outward to have its meaning is called feminine process. Why? Just all we have to do is look at nature and we see that the feminine is the side that does the manifesting. And so that manifesting process that is of Shakti is called Shri. And so when we talk about Shri Vidya, the term Shri Vidya can be used as a name denoting a certain category of practices and books and all that. Or you can look at it just with what it's actually literally saying, is that it's the Vidya of Shri. It means the knowing of that process by which everything manifests. And then what we do is we trace that back to its source. We're grabbing onto the manifestations of Shakti, and through our meditations and contemplations and devotion, we follow it back to its source. And that may sound initially a little bit fuzzy, it may sound a little not easy to understand, but it rests on the foundation of the other two pieces of the stream, or what we're calling this triangle, that all works together. So it rests on the foundation of yoga and purifying our own mind, and it rests on the foundation of the contemplation practices of Vedanta, and then finally we use this, we follow this back to where it came from, and complete the journey back to truth or reality or self-realization, or Atman or Brahman or something like that, whatever you want to call it. God, if you will. In our perspective, the way that we're talking about Yoga, Vedanta, and Tantra blending together, all of these practices are internal. There are many people in ashrams and tradition who do external rituals. To say that we're doing internal is not a criticism. It's not saying there's anything wrong with that, but there's sort of, if you could say, stages of competency or ability or appropriateness. There's also people have a predisposition towards external rituals or to turn within. And the perspective that we're looking at here is completely internal practices. Nothing wrong with doing external rituals, but ultimately it comes down to the internal practices. And so if we hold this in this way, we can also make the observation that what we are not talking about a religion where there's a particular deity or face of God that you worship. That can be there, one can practice that, but that's not what we're talking about here in the blending of Yoga, Vedanta, and Tantra. It's noting that there is one non-dual absolute reality, commonly called Advaita, which is the Shakti that's one with Shiva, but it's not a religion. And you may find these principles inside of particular religions, but in itself is not a religion.